like I said, today's interview, Colin Zima from Omni. And in order to tee this up, we've prepared a little meme of the week for you. So let's take a look.
Hi, Larry. I'm sorry, it's just that on the school bus. May I have that seat?
Yes, if you can answer me these questions 3. Question the first.
Never mind. Excuse me, sir.
Don't make me tap the sign.
But I'm lost and I need to know where...
One eternity later.
All right, so that little clip that Eric prepared for you, I think we've all experienced one end of that or the other, either as someone who's working with a data analyst or a data team, or as someone on a data team who has been in the position of driving that bus. And that is part of what I think Omni is trying to address and what is so exciting about it. So let me bring Colin on here and let's kick things off. Colin, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
All right. So big news from Omni. That's the kind of the commercial launch, which just happened.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, we just hit our 1-year birthday, but we're moving pretty quickly. So I've been in the BI space for a long time at this point. I spent the last 8 years at a company called Looker. We're about 19 people right now. 14 of us came from Looker at some point, and the other 5 came from Stitch. So we have decades of experience building BI tools, and it means that we've been able to get up and running pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. And I think I remember when you launched, and I just read the press release that came out, and I was intrigued at that time. It was like, you know, the vision I thought was really interesting and something kind of fresh. So what is it that Omni is all about? What is it that you're trying to bring to the BI and analytics space that we don't have today?
Yeah, I mean, the backdrop is the way that I really like to think about BI is there's 2 pretty separate ways that people are getting in analytics. There's what I call decentralized analytics or workbook analytics, and then there's centralized or sort of governed analytics. And oftentimes, a lot of organizations need both of those products to exist. So on the decentralized side, it's something like Tableau or maybe Excel. On the centralized side, originally it was like business objects and MicroStrategy, but maybe that's Looker now. And often these sort of products are in contention with each other in some sense, where in workbook land, the superpower that a user has is that they can do analysis quickly in isolation. So when I'm doing analysis, it doesn't interact with your analysis. And that means that we can both move pretty quickly to do things. The challenge there is just centralizing all of that business logic over time becomes very difficult. And centralized BI set out to solve that by creating some sort of governed metrics layer style approach. And that means that you get reliable metrics, but it creates a lot of dependency on the data team. And it creates a potentially bloated sort of metrics layer. And so the really simple concept that we have at Omni is there is a metrics layer on top of which you can build isolated analyses. So we have a sort of governed LookML style layer at the core of the platform, and any user can build analysis on their own. But the key is that rather than thinking about those isolated analyses as decoupled from the centralized modeling layer, we can actually optionally pull the business logic out of it. So the idea is that users across the organization can move really quickly and, for lack of a better word, be a little bit messy about doing analysis, but the data team can integrate and pick up those disparate analyses and integrate them. So kind of best of Looker, best of Tableau, SQL, kind of all blended together into a platform that hopefully is productive for everybody.
Yeah, and that's what really stood out to me is that it's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately and talking to data teams about is like, you know, I've been trying to come up with the right metaphor for it, but how do you set up this kind of structure your data practice so that it's a feedback loop, right? Instead of just kind of a one-way journey, which I think the generation of tools that are most popular right now, the Tableaus and the Power BIs, have really encouraged this kind of one-way journey for data, where it's all about, you know, how can we find data, build some pipelines, prep it, get it into an analyst's hands, and then churn out these dashboards as quickly as possible. But the real problem is that on that front end, there's a lot of, insight discovery that's happening. And there's really no good way to push it back upstream to get it into other dashboards or put it into an AI, an ML model or something like that.
No, I think that's exactly right, which is like the way that I think about it is that your data team's not the only people producing analysis in the organization. And certainly you're going to build stuff from the database forward for your users, but your users are going to create insight in Excel, like it's anywhere across the organization. And you need to be able to absorb those and essentially like optimize them and bring them back to the org.
Right. Right. And it's such a challenge for data teams. And I think one of the things that excites me about it too is, there's this feeling, I think, in the industry right now, and I see it a lot on LinkedIn. I feel it. I know a lot of people feel it, where it's like, we've kind of, there's been a lot of change in what leads up to the BI tool in the last 5 years. You talk about the emergence of, DBT and Snowflake and data engineering and that whole way of doing things. But when it comes to actually driving value on the front end, the whole goal of like, we're going to get this data to the right person at the right time to take the right action, things feel pretty stale. And it's causing this dissatisfaction, I feel, on data teams, where there's a lot of question of like, we're putting a lot of work into this, but we're having a hard time measuring the value, or like, do we really know that what we're building the optimal thing, or we're driving important decisions? And this is one of those ways that I think people can start to feel that, is if you can create this virtuous cycle on the front end where people are generating insights that you can easily plug back into your practice as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Like the best data practices that I've seen are when a data person is working really tightly with a specific org. So they're doing something that's so tightly coupled with marketing that marketing is improved, because like ultimately data is a service org for a lot of the business. And like doing data things in a vacuum is going to be naturally less valuable than doing data things in a marketing context to produce marketing spend, or like in a product context to directly improve the product, or in an operations context to reduce waste and get products delivered more quickly. So the users in those orgs are the people that know sort of what needs to get done. And the more tools I think that we can give them to do things on their own, where the data team can still take control and sort of like make the analysis governed over time. But like, I think what we're trying to fight against is data teams kind of getting too protective of the warehouse and sort of like needing everything to be perfect before it gets handed to someone. Because like, while there are a lot of contexts where you do need to get something perfect in a reporting context for someone to use it, the more that you slow people down, the less that they're going to use sort of data in everyday decision making. So it's like, let's just get it into people's hands, observe how they're using it, and then figure out how to optimize it.
Yeah, and there's this real problem when you're trying to get everything perfect, and you're over centralizing, where it's this thing I've seen with data teams over and over again, where when they want things to be too perfect, they don't want to give users the access, full unfettered access to the data, or the freedom to do things within the BI tool. They had this mistaken idea that like, okay, there's certain use cases I don't like or I don't want to support, and if I just don't support them, they won't happen. And could not be further from the truth. They will just happen outside of your view and outside of your influence.
That's exactly it. And I'm not naive enough to believe that we can like suddenly absorb all decentralized analytics into the platform, but I do think the easier that you make it to do the thing that you're trying to do in line, the less people get kicked out. And in that sense, you almost give data teams more control, because like when you can see it, then you can react to it and you can decide what's right and wrong.
100%.
But again, like if you pretend it doesn't exist, it's in Excel instead.
Yeah, I can think back to many years ago when I was when we were kind of going through the business objects Cognos era transition to the Tableau Power BI era. Those tools, the kind of the Gen 1 BI tools, they put in self-service features where you could build a dashboard on a spreadsheet. And most of the BI teams I worked with just turned those features off. And I would say, I would dozens of teams I would go to, and I'd say, listen, your fear is that someone is going to use the self-service modeling capability to do a full outer join. and you're just ensuring that they're going to do that full outer join in a place where you have no knowledge or visibility into it, instead of the place where you can support them.
Yeah.
And that I was sometimes successful in making that argument and sometimes not. But
Yeah.
I think at this point, it'd be hard pressed to find a data team that doesn't recognize the need for some form of governed self-service. And I think it's actually really coming back into vogue in a way that, if you go back a few years, it seemed like the theory of value in analytics was, let's just churn out these dashboards, these self-service objects as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And I think we've kind of hit the end of that. And one of the ways that I see that coming, and I'm curious to get your take on this, is this sudden explosion of interest in semantic layers and metrics layers, wherein, when I first when I first saw people talking about that, it just kind of reminded me of, the way that kind of that Gen 1 tools and Looker to a degree had that, and then it went away, and now it's coming back. And so what do you see as kind of what's your take on kind of the semantic layer, its lineage, and how it fits in a modern data practice?
Yeah. I mean, Looker very much was a throwback to like business objects, Cognos MicroStrategy, like the original metrics layers of the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, I think back to the point that you just made, like the thing that metrics layers are great at, or essentially clean, well-documented data sets that are made available to people to do ad hoc analytics. What they're great at is just letting people do self-service. So like the magic of Looker was really, it could produce a small number of rows and columns for people that they could go ask their own questions on. So I worked at a company called Hotel Tonight, and a lot of what we sort of delivered with Looker, because I was actually one of the first Looker customers, that's how I got connected, was really just like helping people query at the hotels that were available in their region. And what the metrics layer enables is taking raw data out of the database and putting it in front of the market managers in a way that they could actually consume it and self-serve on it and filter over it and, save views, schedule views, things like that. And I think it's ultimately what made Looker so successful, is you could apply all this business logic to relatively raw data and put it in front of users very quickly. And it was described and documented so that people could query it. And I think the kind of interesting thing that happened is that people saw the success of Looker, and they said, the reason that Looker is successful is because of the metrics layer. And so the natural extension of that was like, let's pull the metrics layer out of Looker, and we'll put it in the database and make it more universal, because obviously the metrics layer and Looker is tightly coupled. I think the thing that people miss is the superpower of Looker was not necessarily the metrics layer in isolation, but rather this coupling of metrics and UIs for users. So the ability for you to come to me and say, I need a new thing, and just for me to be able to make it on the fly and say, now it's a metric, like it's available to you, you can go on your way. And so like, I think the interesting thing that's happening now in the ecosystem is, as sort of small areas of the stack have blown up into whole companies, so like observability and cataloging and now metrics layers and things like that, like these products now need to almost sort of prove their value in isolation. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see whether the decoupled metrics layer can actually stay in sync enough for an organization to find value in it. Because the challenge here is if you think about the headless metrics layer, it actually looks a lot like a modern version of sort of analytical cubing in a database.
Yes.
And there are great reasons to do things like that. Like from an optimization point of view or a standardization point of view, it can be very powerful. But every single view that you build in isolation from your end user, you're sort of decoupling from the usage of that thing. And kind of, I think our strongest point of view at Omni is the metrics need to be coupled with the use cases very tightly. So the metric really only exists in so much as a user is building a report with it. And then where it actually lives, so whether it lives in a document, like a workbook, or in a modeling layer like Omni, or in a headless modeling layer, or just in a database view, I almost think of that as a secondary part of the optimization of that object after you've built it. So I I ultimately think that like the headless metrics layer is like this very idealized world of like my database is perfect. But I think to your point, like things are messy upstream, and it's going to be very hard to keep those things in sync. And so like I think of it as more fluid. Like some things will be there, some things will not. And I don't know if that sort of cuts at the core promise of like a perfect universal layer that explains everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And it that fluidity is the key. And I also wonder too, like there was a reason why we kind of got away from doing that, right? And I experienced that firsthand building out these, like you talked about cubes. My early career was OLAP cubes. And I love me a good OLAP cube, right? But the problem was it was tightly bound. Like there was this world of questions it could answer, and it could answer any of them on the fly in a highly performant way. The second you got outside of that, you were driving people away from the BI tool and into the ungoverned jungle of Excel because they just they can only get so far within kind of the walled garden of the OLAP cube. And I'm very keen to make sure that as we move forward with kind of metrics layer 2, the return, right?
Yep.
That we don't repeat that mistake. And that's one of the things I thought was so cool about Omni is like the vision was like there's a governed tier, but on top of it sits these more chaotic, faster moving, and not chaotic in a bad way, right?
Yeah.
But just these faster moving, more self-service environments. But then we can take the components of those that it makes sense to standardize and push out to the rest of the org and then bring that down into our governed model.
That's exactly it. Like, and like to take it back to the cube idea, like, I think it's funny because I do think that a lot of like when Looker became this big in database analytics thing, people sort of like poo-pooed the idea of taking extracts and doing things with them because now like everything has to be a database. And I think to your point, like cubing data is magical when you're trying to slice and dice like a certain set of columns and measures. But as soon as you need that next thing, they fall down. And I think a lot of what we're trying to do is kind of soften the gradient of those steps. So like if you do need a new column, you can just start querying it maybe now in database, or now we can suck it into the sort of view that the user needs, but just sort of like trying to really soften those discontinuities so that we can make things really fast when they need to be, but you're not making a complete trade-off of like, okay, now I can't do anything outside this world. Like we can be in database when we want to be, or we can be in memory when we want to be. It's not like a hard switch in the app. It's like a soft gradient, or like, do we have the data or do we need to go to the database for it?
Yeah, exactly. The soft gradient, I think, is a good analogy. And that's the way that I think things need to go. It's really exciting that you're building the tooling to support that. How do you think data teams need to change their thinking in order to embrace this way of working?
It's a good question. I mean, I think great data teams are just thinking about how to make the business successful. And so I think it goes back to sort of being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And like, I will concede that I am very far along the side of sort of like instant gratification as a data person. So like, I remember at Hotel Tonight, I just made everyone an admin in the system because I was just like, take care of your own stuff. Like we'll make a mess and I'll clean it up later. But I think it's really just thinking about the trade-off between, like it's going to sound weird, but like the trade-off between correctness and speed, where I think a lot of data people are sort of very objective and logical, and sort of like the idea of someone being able to do something wrong is 10 times more scary than the idea of someone not doing something or doing it really slowly. And I think when you think a little bit more like a sort of like e-commerce PM, I mean, we were talking about this before the show, and like how long you make someone wait for the video to start, you might churn out half your users if they wait a minute. And I think when data teams think a little bit like that, like, am I making the right effort trade-off to serve the business with like highly reliable things, or am I moving fast enough and sort of compromising things at the margin? Like, I think especially for young data teams, speed is an undervalued sort of resource. Like even the meme that you posted at the beginning, like I think a lot of people would prefer like a half an answer to their ticket versus like a 2 week wait for the ticket, because like there's a cycle of getting feedback from your user
Yeah.
about like, am I in the right direction and things like that. And so it's really just like, I think that we need to work on moving really quickly as a group and making sure that we're delivering value and sort of being a little bit comfortable being uncomfortable and unoptimized, and then sort of being able to fix those on the back. And I know that there's lots of examples where that's not the case, but it's just like a sort of like ruthless pragmatism to how things get built and how users are consuming stuff. Like it's okay if people are using data in a not perfect way, because like you're trying to just get them to do the first kind of one or two things.
Yeah. Yeah. I often tell teams when I'm talking to them that your audience, whoever's consuming your data, is not going to really know what they want until you've given them what they asked for.
Yep.
And so you need to find a way to get something that's directionally what they asked for, not perfectly what they asked for, but directionally right, as quickly as you can. And then, you know, if you have a practice where you almost think of, if you can kind of think of all these things as like a hypothesis, like,
Yep.
you know, this user came to me, this department came to me and they asked for these metrics, right? But really, in most cases, they just have a hypothesis of what they need. They don't actually know yet. And when you deliver those metrics, then the light bulb's going to go off. And it's happened to me so many times.
Yep.
You know, you think about in the cube world, I can remember one time where I was working at a power company. And the project management, you know, project management is one of the major functions of a power company, because everything there is a long-term capital project, right?
Yep.
And so, you know, they had asked for this cube to help better manage their capital spend and that their project managers could use. And I spent like 6 months working on it, and then I deliver it, and they loved it for like 2 days, and then the change requests started flowing in, right? And if I had this was over a decade ago, but if I had the tooling and had the philosophy of, you know, let me get them a much smaller, less useful cube that answers 60% of their questions in 3 weeks,
Yep.
I probably would have avoided that situation where it was,
Yeah.
you know, I put a ton of work into this thing, and it was perfect. It was exactly what they asked for, but it wasn't what they needed.
Yeah, exactly. Like they don't know what they're asking for at some level. I mean, it's also the kind of the same way I think about building analytics. Like internally, we just started building. Like I'm about to put out a blog post about sort of like our process to get analytics on our users, and like the first version was literally our person that leads PM. She built just a report, and the SQL for it is horrific. It's like a 200-line union statement of stuff. Like you'd never want to build an analytics practice on like that thing. But like the whole idea was that she just took like an hour, built this thing, made a piece of content from it. And we realized that we were using it every single day. And then we kind of picked it up and said, okay, like how do we actually make this scalable and usable so that on a go forward basis, queries don't take 30 seconds or that it just works. And I think that is always the process for building things, is like make something that's nominally useful that doesn't do exactly what you need, and then sort of figure out what it's not quite doing and optimize. It really is the way. I think landing in product has helped me really think about this. And it's that same picture you get of like the MVP building the car slowly, where like the car can't drive until the car's fully built, or then like the person walking, and then the bicycle, and then the scooter, and then the car. Like that's how you build MVP style product. And just data teams need to work that way. Like we can't sit in DBT and build modern cubes kind of as the business is waiting for all of that stuff to finish. We need to do that as an optimization practice, sort of like after people are getting value.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's like you kind of create this situation too, where, you know, there's lots of little hypotheses happening simultaneously. And the most valuable ones, your job is to monitor it. And the most valuable ones will naturally, if you're paying attention, will naturally emerge.
Yep.
You know, and those are the ones that you go hard on, and you you build the huge pipeline in DBT and you make sure every number is perfect and that, you fully optimized and all that sort of stuff. But you just can't know that ahead of time. You just can't. So one interesting thing you brought up DBT. One thing I wanted to get your take on is just the modern data stack in general. I feel like has reached a point where there's a lot of these point solutions that just do one thing really well.
Yep.
Thanks to the changing in the startup funding situation and, the tech recession that we're in right now, they're being asked to kind of justify why they should exist as just this little piece of what maybe used to be, we talked about semantic layers earlier. That used to be part of a big BI bundle. That's how you got a semantic layer.
Yep.
And now it's a standalone piece. What do you think is going to happen just with the modern data stack ecosystem going forward? The constellation of tools around DBT. They just acquired Transform, I think it was.
Yep.
Do you think there's this wave of consolidation that's going to be coming up in the next few years?
I mean, I keep thinking it's going to happen, and then it just doesn't. So, I would not bet on myself at this point. But I mean, it seems like there are core areas of the stack that have developed to be kind of must-haves. And they are some version of data movement, which maybe used to be Informatica and now is Fivetran.
Yeah.
Some version of a centralized data warehouse, data lake house, whatever you're going to call it, in the middle. We see a lot of like Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, Databricks is obviously there. And BI, which obviously like people are going to consume these things. And I do think like in some ways DBT has inserted themselves in the stack as at least this utility service for transformation in the data warehouse. Like it has become fairly ubiquitous. To me, like those four components are going to be pretty core to every single data stack. And whether or not they consolidate, I almost think I think that they will exist as separate products no matter what, though like strategically people might try to bring them together as Google has by buying Looker, or maybe Salesforce will buy more stuff in the stack as well. But I don't necessarily, I think the positive thing about data is that we've created really nice APIs between these layers.
Yeah.
So like JDBC has made it, I get asked all the time, like if Snowflake builds a BI tool, are you dead? Or like if Google, like now that Google's attached to Looker, like, can you still exist? And I think the nice thing about the data stack is that it is really open, so that if you have a database, you're going to stick the best possible tool on top of it. I do think that buyers are getting fatigued by like the long tail of other things. So like you look at the cataloging space or the observability space, and there are great products in there depending on sort of the size of your company. But I think that they will have to do more work to sort of justify their existence for budgeting versus like that core piece of like data movement, data warehousing, BI. And I do think that those could couple much more tightly with other layers of the stack. Like, frankly, I've been pretty shocked that Snowflake and BigQuery haven't made something like DBT free in the platform.
Yeah.
Because it just drives compute. And kind of similarly, like I was really pushing for BigQuery to do data movement a la Fivetran for free, because it just drives consumption and like ultimately it can monetize through something like BigQuery. So I would not be surprised to see like Snowflake or BigQuery or Databricks take a big bet on data movement, but like it also just hasn't happened to date. So I can't fully explain that, so I don't know why it's not happening. But
yeah,
I do think those core pieces just kind of will exist, and people are comfortable buying them a la carte.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I wonder too is, I've worked a lot of my career with really large enterprises, and for them, the modern data stack ecosystem approach is a challenge because they can onboard essentially one new piece of tech per giant project, right? Like they can't go out and buy 17 point solutions in order to build a new data stack. It's just, that would take a lifetime spent in procurement in order to make it happen in a lot of situations. And so that's one of the things I've wondered is just, as a lot of these tools are really selling to other startups and kind of tech forward companies. But as they have to branch out, I'm in the Detroit area, right? As they go and try to make a big enterprise sale with General Motors, it's going to be hard to make the argument to GM that in order to really get the most out of our tool, please buy these other 9 tools.
Exactly.
That's going to be a challenge. We did have a comment really here. It's from Josh. He just said, sounds like some of the report/dashboard development teams in our examples need to adopt some agile development principles for frequent user check-ins and feedback.
Yep. Nails it. Like,
100%.
I think that's exactly right. Like, just think of data like a product team, and you're just delivering internal tools to make decisions.
Yeah, that actually brings up a good, I think, point. Really, this idea of data as a product, and data products in general, is that really? Do you think that's how data teams should be thinking? Is like adopt formal kind of product or design thinking principles?
I think that probably goes a step further for me, but I sort of prefer like just a messier approach to everything. So I'm not even sure that I'd really develop product properly. So I think that could be, right for some people. I just think the project management around the work needs to be commensurate with like the value getting delivered. And I think there are a lot of smaller projects in data that probably don't need all of that structure, where like a ticketing system can work, but I think the funny thing is like, I think ticketing systems can be positive. It's really just not doing exactly what you're told in the ticket. Like it's the same thing that I tell product teams when we get feature requests, which is like, when we take feature requests from our customers, and this is true of our product, but really any product, like the point is not to build what they say. The point is to understand the problem that they have and try to figure out sort of how that aligns with things that we can solve, and then decide whether the thing that they want needs building. And I think it's more of that style of approach, which again is like more about the feedback and check-ins than it is about, like design thinking or things like that. But if that does help guide the team towards kind of a more introspective version of taking feature requests or sort of work requests, I think that it can be helpful.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. One thing that I see a lot of is this idea. It's really proliferated a lot in the data conversation online in the last 3 or 4 months. And that is that, like the free and easy 2010s are over, money's tight, and now data teams need to justify their existence and be closer to the business. Now, people usually don't explicate on that at all. What does closer to the business actually mean? What would you say that is?
I mean, I think it's just what data teams should have been doing the whole time. So it's like, it's funny because like if you were ever getting further away from the business, you were probably making these mistakes. But I think of it as just like thinking about the ROI of your work. And I think this is actually, this is one of the things that being on the vendor side actually has sort of changed my point of view of doing data stuff. Because like there's 2 ways that you can go sell the product. Like you can sell the product for its individualized beauty and elegance as a product and just say like, oh, people are looking for my product. Or you can sell it as like, we are solving problems for your business. And the product almost doesn't matter, but it's like the outcome of the product. And I think what I learned, especially talking to bigger and bigger customers at Looker, like as we grew over time, is that the way to make your product successful is to not care about the product. It's to care about the business outcomes that you're delivering. And that is all that conversation means for data teams is like, you're not trying to optimize your data stack. You're not trying to build perfect reports. Like you are trying to build dashboards often, but you're trying to do all of those things to solve problems for other areas of the business. And getting closer to the business is just like almost making sure that you're not navel gazing around building really fast cubes, because like a slower cube that does something slightly better for the marketing team, like that's actually what you're going for. And I can actually think about some of these examples in my past where I would make a request to a data team for a piece of analysis, and they might go away for a couple of weeks and then come back and say like, hey, I built this dashboard for you. And sometimes it was great, but I think sometimes if they had just come back, 12 hours later and said like, hey, how does this look? Are we going in the right direction? you can sort of short circuit a lot of that process. And that's just like, that is the closer to the business thing, is I think just like less order taking and more just like making sure that you're solving problems really clearly for the organization. So it's like saving money, making more money.
Yeah.
You know, like now that I have to think about actually running a business, like those are the things that I care about, is like, I've got a bank account that I've got to watch. And like, ultimately I want the revenue number going up and the bank account number going down more slowly.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I was at, I went to, last month, I went to the Data Day Texas conference, which is a really cool conference. I would recommend anybody go check it out. But, you know, Bill Inman was there, legend Bill Inman, and he made a comment that I thought was really interesting, which was like, if you really need to know how your company makes money, and like if you don't know how what you're doing contributes to this, directly to the saving of money, the acquisition of customers, or the retention of customers, as a data team, you're probably in trouble. Especially, there was a lot of concern there too, you know, about the, you know, the tech layoffs and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And so there was a lot like, how do I make sure what I'm doing is valuable? Because I'm worried about getting laid off. And that was Bill's advice. He said, anytime in my career where I knew exactly how I contributed to one of those three processes, I felt good.
Yep.
We have a comment here from Chris. Let me just pull this up real quick.
Yeah.
Chris says, I fall into this trap of trying to get everything perfect, back end, front end design, and end up with an overcomplicated back end and tons of metrics that don't actually get used. So what would be your piece of advice for Chris?
I mean, I think it's just iterate. I think the hardest thing for data people is being okay, being a little bit uncomfortable. Like putting something out before it's ready and having people use it and observing it. And then the other thing is, I think it can be fine to put out metrics that people aren't using, but you like, similar to when you put out a product, like, again, we've talked to the product team about this. Like sometimes you're building things because you declared that they need to get built. Like I need to build this cube because people could want to slice these 10 metrics, but they aren't quite yet. That is valid. But a lot of the times, maybe you're building a dashboard that is there to optimize marketing spend, and you have a hypothesis over the things that people find valuable. You need to retain space to go iterate over that thing. And so maybe you wanted 25 metrics, like go put out 5 or 6, see how they get used, sit down with a user and actually like spend some time with them using the product. Like it can be incredibly valuable to watch people consume the things that you've made and try to see what they're trying to do, because when people describe the things that they want, they're often very different than when people are actually doing the thing that they want. And so like it really is like, get it out earlier and iterate over it and kind of behave like a product team. But yeah, it's like the overbuilding problem, I think is one that, you know, engineers have this problem also, where like, we have engineering teams that want to build services that, you know, you can pull something off the rack, or that could be a little bit less future-proof. Like it's a good thing if your services fall down sometimes. It means like you haven't overinvested in all of them. And I know that sounds weird, but it like, you really just need to get stuff out there and get people using it.
I think there's this thing with just the type of people who are attracted to these types of careers too, right? They're very comfortable with the engineering side of things. Like when you get to go away and you get to focus on solving the technical problems, like the technical problems are bound, they're solvable, right? There's a logical process you follow. The people problems are messy, you know? And so there's a tendency to kind of, when you're unsure what to do, to get really busy solving every technical problem you can think of.
That's exactly, it's so completely true. And I find myself doing it sometimes, where like, I got a hard thing that I need to do, or I could go like write a little bit of docs or like do a little analysis on the side. And I'm like, oh, I'll just go do this analysis. Like this other thing needs to get done. But like, I know that I know exactly what I need. I need to produce this table of data in this analysis. So I'm going to go do that instead. And it's just like, you gotta like, another kind of great example reminds me of is like, I do think that people that have done independent consulting like live and breathe these concepts. Because like if you talk to someone when they have a customer, like you literally are having to prove your value on a constant basis. So that is how you're thinking about producing reporting. And I think when internal teams either have that experience or are kind of can think that way, they can be a lot more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, even, like Eric and I with this Super Data Brothers, fledgling consultancy we have. It's a lot easier to focus on these minutia of running a business, right? Like, oh, am I categorizing these expenses correctly? Like, that's not the hard problem. That's almost irrelevant, right? It's the same thing with data teams. So we got a number of comments coming in here. Here's one I think is interesting. So to assess new HBI tools, like, can we give an example of something that what you might call a modern BI tool can solve that a legacy one could not?
So I'm gonna give a funny answer, which is like I do think that most of these tools can all do the same things ultimately. It's sort of just like how quickly and easily you can do it. So I think like a great example is we were talking to a young company that has no data stack set up at all. And they were sort of like, great, I want to start like looking at pipeline. What do I do? And it was sort of like, go back tonight, like buy Snowflake, buy Fivetran, dump the data, don't do anything with it. And we'll bring a BI tool tomorrow and we'll start asking questions of Salesforce data instantly. And it's just this idea that you can get started and go very, very quickly with a lot of these sort of small components, I think are like the canonical example of what sort of modern products are really good at. I similarly, like there's a lot of stuff that old products, I probably shouldn't call them old products, but like products that were created a long time ago do better than a lot of modern tools. Like period over period analysis and like retail calendar handling are like canonically two things that business objects, Cognos, MicroStrategy are just outstanding at. So like they can be really good at those things. I think the types of things that we're good at that those tools are not good at is just like we're built on a modern data stack. Like we have rebuilt the code from scratch in the last year. So we're using modern web technologies that look better, feel faster, can move data out of a database and into the browser more quickly. And so it's like a lot of the look and feel stuff, especially are what the modern tools are great at. But like every tool is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah. And I think you're really right. Like a lot of there's certain, you look at kind of the Cognoses and MicroStrategies, there are certain pockets where they've really hung on very strong, right? Yep. Like in finance, for example, because of the types of things you mentioned, period over period comparisons. And it's just really easy in Cognos to do that. Yep. And then I look at, more modern BI tools and it can be extremely challenging. Sometimes you can't even solve it in the BI tool, right? You need to build it into your data structures.
No, that's exactly right. Like I'm not ashamed to say that like we look at MicroStrategy and see how they do like data transformation techniques that we can implement, because like they do a lot of those things really well. It's just like they weren't built to hook up to Snowflake and query it live.
Right.
So like if that's how you want to build your data stack, that they had to bootstrap to their system and it comes with deficiencies. So it's like, even in something like Tableau where you're either in memory or in database, it's a switch. I think that's a great example where like we are just in memory when we have the data or we're in database when we don't. Mm-hmm. And those are things that are harder for older tools to kind of adapt to.
Yeah, definitely. This is just a comment from Richard. He says, changes happen as soon as you start engaging with the business. So capturing that change ASAP is crucial. Iterate, adjust early is how you hit business needs because they do change. And that's one thing I really encourage data teams to think about is like, don't get too precious about your analysis or engineering work because it's going to change. There's like this concept I've seen a little bit, this idea of like kind of drift. You build something that's perfect today, and in 8 months it could be still really useful, and in 16 months it could be like nobody uses it anymore, and that's okay as long as you are staying on top of what the business needs and you have a degree of observability into what's going on. And one thing that I think data teams really could improve that I've seen is so many times they have no idea who's using their stuff or for what. Almost like the analytics on your analytics piece.
Completely. No, I mean, that was a first class component of Looker, was just like, we had Looker on Looker. But like, you want to figure out who your advocates are. Like, again, getting closer to the business is knowing like the 4 people in marketing that live in your product, and like actually getting to know those users, and, you know, like making sure that they're handling things well and that they understand the product, and like, how can you up level their ability to do stuff? Like, it's not always just building them things. It's also just like hearing what their needs are and making sure that they're improving in the product.
Yeah, absolutely. So what, with all that said, you know, what do you think the future hold? Like, what does the future hold here? What, as far as Omni's concerned, first of all, you know, you had the public release. So what are you guys working on next, and what are the plans?
Yeah, I mean, so we're starting to gather customers that are like living in the product every day. I mean, I think the thing like strategically in the market that's going to be interesting, and you've written about this also, is just like the Tableau Salesforce relationship is obviously interesting and evolving. The Looker BigQuery one, or Looker Google, like there is something of a vacuum of like new companies in data, in the BI layer specifically, that are interesting and modern. And obviously like we're racing to fill that, but there are a lot of startups that are getting founded, you know, 2022, 2023. And I think it'll be interesting to watch those play out. It does seem like in BI, there is a new generation every 10 years or so. Like it was Business Objects, Cognos, MicroStrategy. Then it was Tableau, Power BI, Click, then Looker, and I guess like ThoughtSpot and Sisense were there, Domo. Like, I'm curious. We're obviously trying to be, you know, the next wave of that. But I think the other interesting thing is like Tableau and Looker are good products. Like they have modernized well as well. So it's like we're going to be challenged to deliver really good stuff. Like we're taking a gigantic swing in that, like we want to be everything that Looker is and everything that Tableau is. So like we've got a lot of building to do. I was telling you before the show, we're very SQL-y right now, and like building data models and kind of a lot of Looker inspiration. Like second half of this year, we're doing a huge lift around calculation UI, kind of Excel style approach to analytics. And so like I'm really excited to bring all these pieces together, just because like a lot of our approaches, I'm trying to build the tool that I really want, which is like this messy hybrid of SQL and Excel and a data model and not a data model. And so like just continuing to build that out and making people successful is kind of 2023 for us.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to. I feel like a lot of the action in the BI space in particular in the last few years has been around solving kind of what you might think of as analyst problems. Like, how can I get a better environment for analysts? You look at like the explosion of notebook-based BI, right? Which is very exciting. Like, I think BI notebooks are awesome. They're really cool. But that's really focused on like a last mile analyst experience solution. And one of the things that excites me about what you're doing at Omni and a few other places too, is I feel like people are starting to step up to take a swing at being a bigger, more, you know, large scale BI platform, which is something that I you know, Tableau and Power BI and all those companies you mentioned earlier, I think had kind of scared people out of for a while. Because it just, you know, their dominance was so clear for so long. But we have reached the point where I think there's starting to be a gap between where the market needs to be and what the existing tools can offer. Especially at scale.
No, absolutely. Like I want our tool to be in a 1 million person company used by every single user.
Absolutely.
And it's not by doing like crazy high level analytics about like, it's really getting the basics right and like usability and feeling like a web app that is modern. Yeah,
absolutely. We got a question here from Steve Talsma. Good to hear from you, Steve. He just any thoughts on how, you know, these tools and approaches look in the context of a data mesh? So we haven't talked about data mesh today, but very interesting concept. I don't think you and I have ever talked about it, so I don't know what your feelings on data mesh are. But
I don't feel like I fully understand what a data mesh is, and I have a point of view on what like I think of a data mesh is. And I actually think it ties back to a lot of the things that we've been saying, which is just like I think of it as a more diverse like analytics environment where you've got a lot of different things in a lot of different places. And like I think the positives are those clean APIs that we were talking about between different service layers mean that you can actually mix and match tools effectively. Like a lot of my point of view is that the network effects of doing a lot of different types of analysis in one place are really powerful. So like the more of those things that we can absorb into our product, the better. But I'm not really sure, I guess, like how it changes the point of view. I do think the sort of same concepts of like in a data mesh, you can optimize things less. Like there's no centralized database that has absolutely everything that you have that is perfectly built for reporting. So I think it's just all the same concepts of like being pragmatic about where you're investing your time and effort. And like if you have a database connected to a BI tool that you bought in 1997 that's building a Crystal Reports, service over, like maybe just leave it there. Like it's part of the data mesh, but it's like to the side and like focus energy in other places.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, we're almost at the top of the hour here, so we're going to be wrapping up. So if you got any last questions or comments, get them in. And thank you for the people who have participated so far. It's good to see so many good questions and feedback in the chat. So given that, I think you and I agree, there's going to be changes. If you're kind of someone who works in the BI analytics front end space, things are going to be changing in the upcoming years. If you're an individual practitioner out there, what do you think they can do as far as skills and approaches, maybe technical skills they should pick up or ways of thinking that they should adopt to help prepare for what's coming?
Yeah. I mean, I am obviously all in on sort of like SQL and kind of getting SQL literate. It doesn't mean being outstanding at SQL, honestly. It just means being able to get data out of a database into another place easily. And certainly like learning DBT is a great vehicle to up level a data analyst to, be an analytics engineer, which really just means like being able to transfer data in your data warehouse. I think honestly, the biggest things are about like these sort of product thinking in content, like making sure that you're building things for end users. I don't think that data skills tend to be the gate for making data people successful. I think like a consultant and, like constantly be proving your worth in terms of how you're building things. I think those tend to be the skills that people need to focus on the most. Yeah,
agreed. One last question here. This is from Chris. So how much importance would you place on the design of a dashboard and the user experience? Can a good looking dashboard with kind of less depth of analytics, maybe less work behind the scenes, but more work making it look pretty, what's the balance there? And is it worth putting more effort into making it look cool?
I'm going to give like a deeply unsatisfying answer, which is like, I violently believe that pretty things, like people have affinity to pretty things, even if they're less valuable. So I do think that investing in making things nice can be really valuable. That said, I'm going to almost say the inverse, which is like, I think the look of things doesn't matter to start. Like what you're trying to do again, like is think like a product manager and get people to use the thing that you're making. So like flash and kind of beautiful design can be a technique to engage people. But if they're not actually engaging with it, I do think you want to start by just building something that's really valuable to people. And that might be a table. Like it might be an actionable table that someone can use to do a thing. I also like one tactical piece of advice is that we built a dashboard at Looker that traced kind of revenue pace by day intra-quarter. And on the last couple of days of the quarter, people would sit on the dashboard and refresh it every single day. And it would show our revenue pace against the last 8 quarters. And we called it the snake chart. But like creating these little tools that people refresh on a constant basis that are like not like pseudo real time, but like every time a deal comes in, you hit refresh on the dashboard and you're like, where are we pace wise? Those little kind of actionability products can massively engage people. And like, it is the concept of clickbait for data, but those types of things actually can be really valuable.
Gotcha. All right. So we're at the top of the hour. We're going to wrap things up. I want to thank you, Colin, for coming on and having such a great conversation, giving people awesome advice. And yeah, so where can people check you out?
ExploreOmni.com. I'm Colin at Explore Omni. Shoot me an email. Like, find us anywhere on the internet and ping us, and we'll get in front of you.
They have a very interesting blog too. I would also tell people, like, I've really enjoyed a lot of the pieces that have gone up there about, the balance between self-service and governance and that sort of thing. I think it's going to be a really important topic going forward. I think you're building a tool that does a great job addressing it and has a fresh take on how to strike that balance, enable self-service, but still give high-quality governed data when it's necessary. So good luck to you, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you and Omni do in the future.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
All right. So just to wrap things up, one more quick word from our sponsor. The sponsor, of course, being Eric and I, the Super Data Brothers. If you're interested in Omni and other BI tools, you're exploring the BI space, and you have a need for someone who deeply understands the existing and upcoming tools, who can put together the right mix of BI and analytics capabilities to make sure you meet your goals, reach out to us. You can reach out to me directly. That's Ryan at superdatabrothers.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, do us a favor and hit the like, comment, and subscribe. If you're watching us on LinkedIn, why don't you just hop over to YouTube real quick and do the same thing for me so that you get notified anytime we go live. Now, last piece of order. Next week, same time, 12 o'clock noon Eastern, here on LinkedIn and the Super Data Brothers YouTube channel, we will be talking to Ollie Hughes, the CEO of Count. So another BI tool. We're really focused on the BI and analytics space here. And this is a really interesting solution. It's very different from anything you've ever seen before. So if you're exploring BI tools, I suggest you tune in and take a look. I'm really looking forward to that. And so without further ado, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next week on the Super Data Show. Bye.